The question of how Palpatine managed to conceal his true identity as a Sith Lord from the Jedi Order for so long is one of the most fascinating aspects of Star Wars lore. At the heart of this deception lies a combination of his profound mastery of the dark side, his political acumen, and the inherent flaws and limitations of the Jedi Order during the waning days of the Republic. Palpatine's ability to mask his presence in the Force was a testament to his unparalleled skill in manipulating its dark currents. The Sith Lord's training under Darth Plagueis honed his capabilities to an extent few could comprehend. Plagueis himself was obsessed with the manipulation of life and death through the Force, and it is highly likely that during this time, he taught Palpatine not only how to cloud the vision of the Jedi, but also how to erase his dark signature from their perception entirely. This level of concealment required immense concentration and a deep connection to the dark side, but it was a skill Palpatine wielded with absolute precision. From a political standpoint, Palpatine carefully curated his public persona as the humble and dutiful senator from Naboo. His rise to power was gradual, calculated, and devoid of any overt displays of ambition that might arouse suspicion. By presenting himself as a loyal servant of the Republic, Palpatine gained the trust of the galaxy's political elite and the Jedi Council. His political maneuvering was as much a part of his deception as his mastery of the Force. He cultivated an image of modesty and selflessness, which disarmed those around him, making it nearly impossible for anyone to consider that he might harbor sinister motives. The Jedi Order itself, once a beacon of wisdom and guardians of peace, had become complacent and rigid. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Order was deeply entrenched in the politics of the Republic. This entanglement clouded their judgment and diminished their ability to perceive the subtler movements of the dark side. The Jedi were trained to sense and confront overt threats, but Palpatine's subtle manipulations fell outside their traditional paradigm of understanding. He did not engage the Jedi directly or reveal himself in any way that would provoke suspicion. Instead, he operated from the shadows, allowing the Jedi's own hubris and preoccupations to blind them. The Force itself played a role in Palpatine's ability to remain hidden. The dark side, as described by Yoda, was difficult to predict and understand. It thrived on chaos, fear, and suffering, all of which were proliferating under Palpatine's orchestration. By engineering galactic conflict and division, he created an environment where the Jedi's ability to foresee the future or detect the dark side was severely diminished. The Force was clouded, a phenomenon that the Jedi themselves recognized but could not fully understand or counteract. Palpatine's orchestration of the Clone Wars was a masterstroke in ensuring his concealment. As both Supreme Chancellor of the Republic and the secret leader of the Separatists through his alter ego, Darth Sidious, he played both sides of the conflict to his advantage. The war served to divert the Jedi's attention and resources, forcing them into the role of military leaders rather than peacekeepers. This shift in focus further dulled their ability to sense the dark side as they were consumed by the immediate demands of the war. The constant pressure and the morally ambiguous nature of the conflict left the Jedi vulnerable to Palpatine's manipulations. Moreover, the Jedi's adherence to their own dogma and the rigid structures of their order contributed to their downfall. Their inability to adapt to changing circumstances and their unwavering belief in their moral and philosophical superiority created a blind spot that Palpatine exploited to great effect. They failed to question the true nature of the conflict they were embroiled in and the unprecedented accumulation of power in the office of the Chancellor. By the time they began to suspect Palpatine, it was already too late. Palpatine's manipulation extended beyond the Jedi and into the very fabric of galactic society. He orchestrated events in such a way that any opposition to his rise would appear to be in conflict with the greater good. His skill in manipulating public opinion ensured that he was seen as a savior of the Republic rather than a potential threat. The Senate's overwhelming support for his policies and emergency powers further insulated him from scrutiny. Even the Jedi, who were wary of his growing influence, found themselves in a precarious position, unable to act decisively without risking the perception of treason against the Republic. His ability to instill trust and loyalty in key individuals was another factor in his success. Figures like Count Dooku, who played the role of the charismatic but ultimately expendable leader of the Separatists, and Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi's prophesied chosen one, were instrumental in his plans. Dooku's fall to the dark side and his eventual sacrifice at Palpatine's hands demonstrated the Sith Lord's willingness to use and discard even his closest allies to achieve his goals. Anakin, on the other hand, represented both a challenge and an opportunity for Palpatine. By exploiting the young Jedi's fears and insecurities, Palpatine was able to turn him against the Order, ensuring the final collapse of the Jedi and the rise of the Sith. Palpatine's success in hiding from the Jedi also relied on his understanding of their weaknesses and the limitations of their teachings. The Jedi Order, as it stood during the final days of the Republic, had become disconnected from the realities of the galaxy they were sworn to protect. Their focus on detachment and suppression of emotions left them ill-equipped to deal with an adversary who thrived on exploiting such vulnerabilities. Palpatine's insights into the nature of fear, anger, and desire allowed him to manipulate not only individuals like Anakin, but also the broader galactic populace. The dark side's influence over Palpatine granted him the ability to foresee and shape events in ways that the Jedi could not comprehend. His mastery of Sith alchemy and ancient dark side rituals likely played a role in further enhancing his ability to obscure his presence. These dark arts, forbidden and largely forgotten by the Jedi, gave him an edge that even the most powerful members of the Jedi Council could not counter. Another critical aspect of Palpatine's deception was his use of intermediaries and proxies. By rarely acting directly and instead relying on agents like Maul, Dooku, and later General Grievous, Palpatine kept his own involvement in galactic affairs shrouded in mystery. These agents carried out his will, spreading chaos and fear, while Palpatine maintained the facade of a benevolent leader working tirelessly for peace. The culmination of all these factors is mastery of the dark side, his political cunning, the flaws of the Jedi, and the manipulation of galactic events allowed Palpatine to remain hidden in plain sight. Even when the Jedi began to suspect the existence of a Sith Lord orchestrating events from the shadows, they could not fathom that he was the very man they had placed their trust in, the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. Palpatine's deception was so complete that by the time his true nature was revealed, he had already achieved his ultimate goal, the fall of the Jedi Order and the establishment of the Galactic Empire. Palpatine's ability to continue his deception, even as the Jedi began to grow suspicious, underscores the depth of his planning and his capacity for long-term manipulation. He did not rely on any single strategy to hide his Sith identity. Rather, he wove a complex web of deceit that exploited every weakness of his adversaries and the institutions they served. One of the most significant aspects of Palpatine's success was his unparalleled patience. Unlike many Sith before him, who sought immediate power and domination, Palpatine understood the value of gradual, methodical progress. His long game allowed him to cultivate trust and loyalty among those he needed to manipulate, including the Senate, the military, and even the Jedi themselves. This patience was evident in his careful grooming of Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine saw Anakin's potential from an early stage and positioned himself as a mentor and confidant, feeding the young Jedi's doubts about the Order while fostering his ambition and fear. Anakin's gradual turn to the dark side was not a sudden event, but the result of years of careful psychological manipulation. Palpatine played on Anakin's fears of loss and his desire for control, particularly with regard to his secret marriage to Padme Amidala. By presenting himself as someone who could offer Anakin the power to save those he loved, Palpatine exploited a vulnerability that the Jedi Council had failed to address. The Jedi's rigid adherence to their code and their failure to support Anakin emotionally only drove him further into Palpatine's influence. Another factor in Palpatine's success was his exploitation of the Republic's political decay. The Republic, at the time of his rise, was a fractured and corrupt institution, plagued by bureaucracy and self-interest. Palpatine skillfully positioned himself as a reformer, someone who could cut through the red tape and restore order. His calls for stronger executive powers were met with widespread approval, particularly as the threat of the separatist movement grew. Each crisis he engineered further justified the consolidation of power in his hands, allowing him to dismantle the checks and balances that might have otherwise exposed him. The Jedi, despite their suspicions, were constrained by their role as peacekeepers and their loyalty to the Republic. They were reluctant to act against the Chancellor without concrete evidence, fearing that doing so could be interpreted as a coup. This hesitation was exactly what Palpatine counted on. He knew that the Jedi's sense of duty and their respect for the Republic's democratic processes would prevent them from taking preemptive action. By the time they did decide to confront him directly, he had already maneuvered events to ensure their failure. Palpatine's manipulation of the Clone Wars further solidified his grip on power. The war was not just a means of weakening the Republic, and the Jedi, it was also a tool for controlling public perception. The constant state of emergency allowed him to present himself as an indispensable leader, someone who could navigate the galaxy through its darkest hour. The Jedi, now generals in a war they were never meant to fight, found themselves increasingly isolated from the very people they were sworn to protect. Public opinion shifted, and the Jedi were seen less as guardians of peace and more as instruments of a failing war effort. The Clone Wars also provided Palpatine with a loyal and efficient military force that answered directly to him, the clone army. The clones, bred for obedience, were a key element of his plan. The activation of Order 66, a contingency command embedded in the clones' programming, was the final stroke in his strategy to eliminate the Jedi. With a single command, the Jedi were branded as traitors and systematically exterminated, leaving Palpatine unchallenged. The symbolic and literal centerpiece of Palpatine's rise was the transformation of the Republic into the Galactic Empire. This was not merely a change in name or structure, it was the culmination of his vision for absolute control. The Senate, once the heart of galactic democracy, became a rubber-stamp body, its power rendered meaningless under the Emperor's rule. The institutions that had once safeguarded the Republic's ideals were now instruments of oppression. What made Palpatine's success so devastating was that he did not seize power through overt force or rebellion. He was granted it by the very system he sought to destroy. His rise was legal, even celebrated, as he exploited the fear and desperation of a galaxy at war. By the time the full scope of his plan was revealed, the Republic's democratic foundations had already crumbled, and the Jedi, the last line of defense, were all but extinct. Palpatine's control over the dark side was not merely a tool for hiding his presence, but also a means of bending reality to his will. His mastery allowed him to foresee potential threats and adapt his plans accordingly. He could manipulate the future by influencing key events and individuals, ensuring that any potential opposition was neutralized before it could pose a real danger. This foresight, combined with his ability to manipulate the emotions and actions of others, made him nearly unstoppable. The fall of the Jedi was not just a physical extermination, but a spiritual and ideological defeat. Palpatine understood that the Jedi's power came not only from their connection to the Force, but also from their role as symbols of hope and justice. By discrediting and destroying them, he extinguished the light they represented, leaving the galaxy in darkness. The Sith, long thought to be extinct, had triumphed not through brute strength, but through cunning, deception, and the exploitation of their enemies' weaknesses. Palpatine's rise to absolute power and his ability to remain hidden for so long also hinged on his manipulation of symbolism and narrative control. He understood that perception often outweighs reality in the minds of the masses. By presenting himself as a champion of peace and stability, he was able to manipulate not just individuals but entire systems of governance and belief. The Jedi, once revered as protectors of the Republic, were systematically recast as threats to its stability. This shift in perception was not achieved overnight, but through a calculated campaign of misinformation and staged crises. One of Palpatine's most significant achievements was his ability to turn the very tools of democracy against itself. He operated within the legal framework of the Republic, exploiting its institutions and procedures to centralize power. Each step in his ascension from his election as Chancellor to the granting of emergency powers was carried out with the full endorsement of the Senate. This not only legitimized his actions but also made resistance more difficult, as any opposition could be framed as undermining the Republic's democratic processes. The irony of the situation was that the Republic's democratic mechanisms, which were meant to prevent tyranny, were the very means by which Palpatine established his dictatorship. The Jedi's failure to recognize the true nature of the threat posed by Palpatine was due in part to their reliance on prophecy and tradition. The prophecy of the Chosen One, who was destined to bring balance to the Force, played a significant role in shaping their decisions. Anakin Skywalker was believed to be this prophesied figure, and the Jedi placed great faith in his potential to end the Sith threat. However, their interpretation of the prophecy was limited and rigid, preventing them from considering alternative outcomes or the possibility that the prophecy itself could be manipulated. Palpatine, on the other hand, saw the potential in Anakin not as a savior but as a weapon. He exploited the Jedi's belief in the prophecy to position Anakin as a central figure in his plans. By nurturing Anakin's doubts and frustrations, Palpatine created a wedge between him and the Jedi Council. This division was further deepened by the Council's decision to withhold the rank of Master from Anakin, despite his appointment to the Council, a move that played directly into Palpatine's hands. The Sith Lord used this perceived slight to fuel Anakin's resentment, driving him closer to the dark side. The manipulation of Anakin culminated in one of Palpatine's most pivotal deceptions, the revelation of his Sith identity. This was not an accidental or desperate act, but a calculated move designed to exploit Anakin's inner conflict. By presenting himself as the only one capable of saving Padme from a fate Anakin feared, Palpatine offered a temptation that the young Jedi could not resist. This act of revelation was carefully timed to coincide with Anakin's growing disillusionment with the Jedi, ensuring that when the moment came, Anakin would see Palpatine not as a threat but as a savior. The subsequent fall of Anakin Skywalker and his transformation into Darth Vader marked the final piece in Palpatine's grand design. With Anakin at his side, Palpatine not only gained a powerful apprentice, but also dealt a psychological blow to the Jedi. Anakin's betrayal was more than a personal tragedy. It symbolized the failure of the Jedi Order and their inability to prevent the rise of the Sith. Vader became both the enforcer of Palpatine's will and a living testament to the Jedi's downfall. Palpatine's mastery of psychological manipulation extended beyond individual figures to the broader galactic population. He understood that fear was a powerful motivator, and he used it to consolidate his rule. By perpetuating the conflict through the Clone Wars, he created a climate of fear and uncertainty that made the populace more willing to accept authoritarian measures. Each victory or defeat in the war served to further justify the expansion of his powers, as the public and the Senate were led to believe that only strong, centralized leadership could ensure their safety. The transition from Republic to Empire was not just a change in governance but a redefinition of galactic identity. Palpatine framed this shift as a necessary evolution, portraying the Empire as the culmination of the Republic's ideals, rather than a betrayal of them. The Senate's applause at the declaration of the Empire was not merely a reflection of political acquiescence, but also a testament to Palpatine's ability to control the narrative. He had transformed himself from a servant of the Republic into its unquestioned ruler, with the full support of the very system he had dismantled. The Jedi's failure to anticipate or counter Palpatine's plans can also be attributed to their diminished connection to the Force. As the dark side grew stronger, their ability to perceive the future and sense the presence of evil was clouded. This was not merely a consequence of Palpatine's direct interference, but also a reflection of the shifting balance of the Force itself. The Jedi had become so entrenched in their role as servants of the Republic that they failed to recognize the deeper spiritual battle that was taking place. Their reliance on tradition and their rigid understanding of the Force left them vulnerable to a foe who operated outside their established norms. Palpatine's rise was the culmination of centuries of Sith planning and adaptation. The rule of two, established by Darth Bane, ensured that the Sith would remain hidden, biding their time and growing stronger with each generation. Palpatine was the ultimate product of this philosophy, embodying its principles in both his methods and his ambitions. Unlike his predecessors, who sought to overthrow the Jedi through direct confrontation, Palpatine recognized that true victory required patience, subtlety, and a deep understanding of his enemy's weaknesses. In the end, Palpatine's ability to hide from the Jedi and orchestrate their downfall was a testament to his genius as a strategist and his unparalleled mastery of the dark side. He understood not only the mechanics of power, but also the psychology of those who wielded it. By the time the Jedi realized the extent of his deception, their fate was already sealed. The Sith had returned, not as conquerors from the shadows, but as rulers of a galaxy that had willingly embraced their dominion. By the time the Jedi began to suspect Palpatine, it was already too late. His intricate web of deception, manipulation, and long-term planning had ensured that every move they could make would either confirm his narrative or play directly into his hands. The Jedi's suspicion came only after years of Palpatine meticulously positioning himself as the Republic's savior, earning the unwavering trust of the Senate, the public, and even many within the Jedi Order itself. Their growing unease about the dark side's influence and their suspicion of the Sith operating in the shadows were, in the end, vague and unfocused. They could sense that the dark side was clouding their vision, but they were unable to pinpoint its source. This was not merely a failure of individual foresight, but a systemic flaw within the Jedi Order, exacerbated by their rigid adherence to dogma and their increasing entanglement in the Republic's political affairs. By the time they considered the possibility that Palpatine might be the Sith Lord they were seeking, he had already consolidated his power to the point where any action against him could be easily framed as treason. The Jedi's eventual confrontation with Palpatine was not a moment of decisive action but of desperate reaction. When Mace Windu and a small group of Jedi Masters moved to arrest the Chancellor, they did so without the full backing of the Senate or the Jedi Order. Their decision, while justified, lacked the strategic foundation and public support necessary to succeed. Palpatine, as always, was prepared for this contingency. He turned their attempted arrest into a coup in the eyes of the galaxy, further solidifying his grip on power and justifying the final purge of the Jedi through Order 66. By then, the Jedi were no longer the guardians of peace and justice, but hunted fugitives, scattered and broken. Palpatine had orchestrated their fall so completely that even their legacy as protectors of the Republic was overshadowed by the Empire's propaganda machine, which cast them as traitors and warmongers. The galaxy had embraced its new reality, and the Sith ruled openly for the first time in a millennium. Palpatine's ability to hide from the Jedi and outmaneuver them at every turn was a masterclass in manipulation and strategic foresight. He did not merely hide in the shadows, he made the shadows an integral part of the galaxy's very structure, ensuring that by the time the Jedi discovered his true nature, they were powerless to stop him. The Jedi's story was one of gradual erosion, a slow but inevitable descent into irrelevance orchestrated by a man whose every move had been calculated long before they ever saw him as a threat. By the time the truth was laid bare, Palpatine had already won, and the galaxy belonged to the Sith.